The courtroom was packed that morning. Cameras weren't allowed, but that didn't stop reporters from waiting outside, whispering rumors and snapping photos of anyone who looked important. Inside, the air smelled of wood polish and old paper. The heavy oak doors shut behind a young woman named Emily Carter, who walked nervously toward the defendant's table. Her steps were small, cautious, like she was walking into a lion's den. She was in her early 30s, wearing a simple gray suit, one that looked borrowed or maybe secondhand. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a thin folder. Her eyes darted between the jury box and the judge's bench, where Judge Raymond Holtz sat, a man infamous for his arrogance and sharp tongue. Judge Holtz had ruled over this court for more than 20 years. He liked power. He liked watching people squirm. And more than anything, he liked reminding women, especially young ones, that this was his courtroom. His gavel was his crown, and his robe was his armor. Emily wasn't a criminal. She was suing her former company, Stratastec, for wrongful termination and harassment. She had been one of their top analysts before she was suddenly fired after reporting unethical practices. She had no money for a high-profile law firm, no political connections, and no fancy lawyer, or at least that's what everyone in the room thought. Judge Holtz glanced at her with that familiar condescending smirk. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair, "Ms. Carter, you're representing yourself." Emily opened her mouth, but before she could speak, the door at the back of the courtroom opened. A tall man in a charcoal suit walked in, clean-cut, confident, and calm. He had sharp blue eyes that missed nothing, and his presence instantly drew attention. He approached the bench and said politely, "Apologies for the delay, Your Honor. I'm representing Ms. Carter today. Name's Michael Rivers." Holtz squinted. "Rivers? Never heard of you." "You knew." Michael gave a small, respectful smile. "You could say that, sir." The judge scoffed and waved a hand. "Fine, sit down. Let's get this circus moving." As Michael took his seat beside Emily, she whispered, "You didn't have to come." "I could've," he interrupted softly. "You did the hard part, Emily. You stood up. Now let me handle the rest." The trial began. Stratastec's lawyer, Daniel Ross, was one of those expensive, smooth-talking attorneys with perfect hair and a voice that dripped arrogance. He painted Emily as a bitter ex-employee looking for attention. Every word was rehearsed, every sentence designed to make her seem emotional and unstable. Judge Holtz seemed to enjoy it. He interrupted Emily's testimony again and again, asking irrelevant questions, smirking at her nervous tone, and even mocking her appearance at one point. At one moment, when Emily tried to explain how she had been harassed, Holtz leaned forward and said with a chuckle, "Ms. Carter, women in the workplace sometimes confuse professional criticism with harassment. Perhaps you were just oversensitive." The courtroom chuckled quietly. Emily froze, her face turned pale. Michael's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. He leaned forward slowly, his voice calm but firm. "Objection, Your Honor. That statement is inappropriate and irrelevant to the testimony." Holtz raised an eyebrow. "Objection overruled. Sit down, Mr. Rivers. Don't tell me how to run my courtroom." Michael nodded slightly but didn't sit. "I'm only asking that my client be treated with basic respect." Holtz's voice turned cold. "You're bordering on contempt, counselor. Do you want to spend the night in a cell?" A few people in the courtroom gasped quietly. Emily looked terrified, but Michael's expression remained unreadable. He finally sat down and the trial continued. During recess, Emily whispered, "He hates me. We're going to lose." Michael looked at her, and for the first time his voice lost its courtroom calm. "Emily, listen carefully. You're not the one who should be afraid here." She blinked. "What do you mean?" He smiled faintly. "Let's just say Judge Holtz doesn't know who he's dealing with." Emily frowned. "You mean?" But before she could finish, the bailiff called them back. The next witness was being sworn in. What Emily didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that Michael Rivers wasn't a lawyer at all. His real name was Agent Michael Hale, an undercover operative with the CIA's Domestic Corruption Division. He had been assigned to investigate a web of corporate bribery, and one of the names that had come up repeatedly was Judge Raymond Holtz. Michael hadn't chosen Emily's case by accident. Stratastec had been one of the companies funneling money through the judge's courtroom, paying for favorable rulings. Emily's lawsuit had threatened to expose that, and her firing had been the company's way of shutting her up. Now, Holtz was unknowingly sitting across from the man who had been watching him for months. As the afternoon session began, Michael leaned back in his chair, calm and silent. Holtz smirked again, thinking he had broken the young woman's spirit. But beneath that calm face, Michael was already planning something far bigger than just winning a lawsuit. He was about to dismantle an empire of corruption, right from inside the judge's own courtroom. The second day of the trial began with the same tense silence that had filled the courtroom before, but something felt different. Emily walked in beside Michael this time, her steps a little more confident. She didn't know exactly why she trusted him so much. Maybe it was the calm in his eyes, or the way he made her feel safe even when the judge seemed ready to crush her. Reporters were whispering again outside the door. News of Judge Holtz's sharp remarks had leaked to the public somehow. A few blogs were already calling him out for verbal harassment during a sensitive harassment trial. Holtz wasn't pleased. He came in looking furious, slamming his gavel so hard the sound echoed like thunder. "This courtroom," he barked, "is not a place for rumors or amateur reporting. Anyone caught spreading false stories will be held in contempt." Michael only glanced up for a second, then leaned toward Emily and whispered, "He's nervous." "Good." The defense team started the morning by calling a witness, Stratastech's HR director, a woman named Corinne Boyd who looked as though she had rehearsed her testimony for weeks. She spoke with fake kindness, describing Emily as difficult and emotionally unstable. Every word was designed to discredit her. When it was Michael's turn to cross-examine, he stood up slowly, buttoned his jacket, and walked toward the witness stand with a measured calm. "Ms. Boyd," he began softly, "you said Emily Carter had emotional problems, correct?" Karen nodded, confident. "Yes. She would overreact, cry at meetings, accuse supervisors of unfairness. It was disruptive." Michael tilted his head. "And you're sure it wasn't because she was being harassed or pressured?" Karen's smile faltered for just a moment. "No, absolutely not. Our company has strict policies." Michael paced slowly. "Right, policies, like the one that says no manager should have contact with an employee after office hours." Karen blinked. "Yes, that's correct." Michael paused, turned slightly toward the jury, then held up a printed email. "Then how do you explain this?" "An email from your vice president sent to Ms. Carter at 2:14 a.m. asking her to meet alone to discuss her career growth." The room went quiet. Judge Holtz leaned forward. "Mr. Rivers, where did you get that document?" Michael didn't look at him. "It was included in the discovery materials, Your Honor. You approved it yourself last week." Holtz's jaw tightened. He had indeed approved all discovery files but clearly hadn't noticed this one. The jury watched as Corinne Boyd fumbled for words. I'm not aware of that message," she stammered. Michael nodded. "Of course not, because 2 days later Ms. Carter was fired. Tell me, Ms. Boyd, do you think that's a coincidence?" Karen's face went red. "Objection!" Ross, the defense attorney, shouted. "He's badgering the witness." But before Holtz could say a word, Michael looked up and said, "Withdrawn." He turned back to his seat, his voice calm again. "No further questions." He sat down. Emily leaned closer, whispering, "How did you get that email? It wasn't in my files." Michael gave a faint smile. "Let's just say I have access to things most lawyers don't," she frowned. "You keep saying things like that. Who are you really?" He met her gaze quietly. "Someone who believes you deserve justice. The rest will make sense soon." That night, after court adjourned, Michael didn't go home. He drove to a nondescript government building on the outskirts of town. Inside, he met a woman waiting by the elevators, Agent Renee Foster, his CIA contact. "You're pushing it, Hale," she said quietly as they walked down a corridor. "If Holt suspects you're not really a lawyer, this whole operation is blown." Michael didn't stop walking. "He's too arrogant to suspect anything. He thinks I'm some rookie attorney who got lucky." Renee handed him a file. "We found more. Holtz's financials, offshore accounts, shell companies. Stratastech has been paying him for years, direct deposits through intermediaries." Michael's expression darkened. "We can't move yet, not until I get him to perjure himself or destroy evidence. He needs to hang himself in that courtroom." Renee sighed. "You're playing with fire." Looked at her, eyes cold. "Fire's the only way to burn corruption out." Next morning, Michael arrived early. He placed a small, inconspicuous flash drive in his briefcase. As Emily walked in, he noticed the tired look in her eyes and said softly, "You're doing better than you think. Just breathe." Holtz entered moments later, scowling as usual, the courtroom filled with quiet tension. The defense was ready to present their final evidence, a supposed recording of Emily admitting she lied about the harassment. Ross stood proudly, playing the audio file. Emily's voice was heard saying, "I made it all up. I just want money." The jury shifted uncomfortably. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "That's not me," she whispered. "That's not even my voice." Michael didn't panic. He waited until the recording ended, then said calmly, "Permission to examine the file, Your Honor." Holtz sighed, "Make it quick." Michael plugged in his flash drive, copied the audio, and within seconds projected a waveform analysis on the screen. "This," he said, "is an AI-generated deepfake. The waveform has identical noise patterns every 2.3 seconds. No human speech does that." Gasps filled the room. Ross jumped up. "That's ridiculous." Michael turned, his tone suddenly sharp. "Is it? Because this exact audio was uploaded to a proxy server last night from an IP address registered to your firm." The entire courtroom froze. Judge Holtz looked furious. "That's an accusation without proof." Michael's voice dropped lower, calmer, but deadly serious. "Proof, Your Honor, is what I brought with me." He handed a sealed folder to the clerk. Inside were digital records, server logs, timestamps, and payment transactions linking Stratestek's lawyer to a data forgery specialist. The judge's face went pale. Emily looked at Michael in awe. "How did you even?" He whispered, "Let's just say, I've been watching them for longer than you think." But what Michael didn't say, what even Emily didn't yet know, was that the next part of his plan wasn't about proving her innocence anymore. It was about exposing something much bigger, something that reached all the way up to the man sitting on that bench. And by the end of the next session, Judge Holtz would find himself fighting for more than his reputation. He'd be fighting for his freedom. By the third day, the courtroom was no longer just a courtroom. It felt like a battlefield. The media had caught on to the drama unfolding inside. "Judge insults woman during harassment trial" was trending on every news site. Protesters had gathered outside holding signs that read, "Justice for Emily" and "Corrupt courts destroy lives." When Emily walked in that morning, she felt all eyes on her. For the first time, she didn't bow her head. She sat straight beside Michael, who looked calm as ever, tapping something on his tablet. Judge Holtz entered minutes later, his usual smug confidence replaced with irritation. His skin looked pale, and the circles under his eyes were darker than before. He'd clearly seen the news, and he didn't like being the villain in anyone's story. He slammed his gavel. "Order! I will not tolerate another day of theatrics. Mr. Rivers, this is your last warning. One more stunt and I'll have you disbarred." Michael didn't even look up. "Then I suggest, Your Honor, that you brace yourself, because today's going to be full of surprises." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The first witness for the day was supposed to be Stratestek's CEO, Charles Denton, a man known for his fake charm and political connections. But before he could even be sworn in, Michael stood up. "Your Honor, before we proceed, I have a motion." Holtz groaned, "Another one." "Yes," Michael said calmly. "A motion to admit new evidence under Section 37B, evidence pertaining to judicial misconduct relevant to this case." Holtz stiffened. "Judicial misconduct, are you implying?" Michael's tone was steady. "I'm not implying, Your Honor, I'm presenting." The room went silent. Even the air felt heavier. Michael clicked a remote and a file appeared on the courtroom monitor, bank records, transaction logs, and a series of encrypted emails. Holtz's face drained of color. Michael continued, voice even and clear. "These are wire transfers from an offshore account registered to one Raymond Holtz. The sender, Stratastec Global Holdings. What? Gasps filled the room. Ross jumped to his feet. Objection, this is outrageous. Michael didn't even turn his head. Overruled, he said softly, looking straight at Holtz. Or do you prefer I say it, Your Honor? For a moment, no one breathed. Holtz's lips parted. This is fabricated. Do you expect anyone to believe? Michael raised a hand. I expected that response. That's why the CIA verified these documents this morning. Holtz froze mid-sentence. The what? Michael's calm, professional smile vanished. His voice hardened, every word slicing through the tension like a blade. The Central Intelligence Agency, Your Honor. I've been undercover for months, investigating corruption within the judicial system and its ties to corporate fraud. You've been on that list since the first whistleblower came forward. Emily's eyes widened. The jury looked stunned. Reporters in the back struggled to contain themselves, phones trembling in their hands. You're lying, Holtz shouted, slamming his gavel. You're no federal agent. Michael didn't flinch. Would you like proof? He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a leather folder, and flipped it open. The golden CIA insignia gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The courtroom erupted in chaos. The bailiff moved forward, unsure whether to intervene. Holtz stood up, his voice trembling between anger and fear. You think you can barge into my court and make a mockery of me? Michael stepped forward, his voice low but firm. You made a mockery of justice, Judge. You took bribes, silenced victims, and destroyed innocent lives. Emily Carter was just one of many. Holtz's hands shook. You have no right. I have every right, Michael cut in. You see, this isn't just about Emily's case anymore. The CIA's been watching your bank activity for months. Offshore transfers, hidden real estate, even private meetings with executives from Stratastec under the pretense of charity events. Emily sat frozen, barely able to process what was happening. She had come here hopping just to clear her name, and now the man who mocked her was being exposed before the whole city. Holtz's anger boiled over. Bailiff, arrest this man. He's impersonating a federal agent. But the bailiff didn't move. Instead, two men in dark suits entered from the back, calm, expressionless, badges gleaming. One of them said, That won't be necessary, Judge. We're with the agency. The color drained completely from Holtz's face. Michael turned back to Emily, speaking quietly so only she could hear. You see, Emily, sometimes justice takes time. Sometimes the truth hides behind robes and titles, but it always comes out. Tears welled up in her eyes. You did all this for me. He shook his head softly. For everyone who's ever been silenced. The agents approached the bench. One read out, Judge Raymond Holtz, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice, bribery, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The courtroom was dead silent as they handcuffed him. Holtz tried to speak, but no words came out. His empire of arrogance had collapsed in front of his own courtroom. As the agents escorted him out, he turned to Michael with fury and desperation. You'll regret this. You think you're saving her. You're just another pawn in a bigger game. Michael's eyes stayed cold. Maybe, but at least I'm not the one selling justice for a price. When Holtz was gone, the courtroom seemed to exhale for the first time in days. Reporters scrambled out to call their editors. Jurors whispered in disbelief. Michael approached the bench and addressed the temporary presiding judge who had just been called in. Your Honor, I move to dismiss all charges against Ms. Carter with prejudice. She's innocent. The new judge looked at the evidence, nodded, and said, Motion granted. Emily covered her mouth as tears streamed down her cheeks. The sound of the gavel this time wasn't cruel or mocking, it was freeing. When they stepped outside, reporters swarmed around them, shouting questions. Cameras flashed. Emily couldn't stop shaking, but this time it wasn't from fear, it was relief. Michael guided her through the crowd, whispering, Don't talk to them yet. Let it breathe. The truth's already louder than anything you could say. As they reached the car, Emily turned to him. What happens now? He looked toward the courthouse, where Judge Holtz was being loaded into a black government SUV. Now, he said quietly, now we find out who else was pulling his strings. Because deep down, Michael knew Holtz wasn't the top of the food chain. He was just one corrupt man in a network that went much higher, into politics, corporations, and even the agencies that were supposed to protect the people. And Michael wasn't done, not yet. The storm that followed Judge Holtz's arrest was unlike anything the city had ever seen. Within 24 hours, every major news outlet in the country was covering it. Corrupt judge exposed by undercover CIA agent blazed across headlines. Reporters camped outside the courthouse day and night, hungry for any new development. But while the world celebrated, inside a quiet government office on the edge of D.C., Michael Hale wasn't celebrating. He was sitting across from his superior, Director Harris, a man with sharp gray eyes and a voice that carried both authority and warning. "Good work, Hale," Harris said, tapping a folder on the desk. "Holtz's arrest triggered a chain reaction. 3 other judges are under investigation, and Stratostech's CEO vanished on a private jet last night. You lit a fire." Michael leaned back, exhausted. "Yeah, well, fires have a way of spreading." Harris studied him for a moment. "You've gone off script before, but this time you really went rogue, exposing yourself in open court. That wasn't part of the operation." Michael's eyes hardened. "If I hadn't, Holtz would have walked. The system protects people like him until someone forces it to look." The director sighed. "You're lucky it worked. The agency wants to keep this quiet, no more public theatrics." Michael nodded but didn't promise anything. He was done with quiet. Meanwhile, Emily's world had changed overnight. She had gone from being mocked in the press to being called a heroine of courage. Strangers sent letters thanking her for standing up. Women from across the country shared their stories, saying she gave them strength to speak out. Still, fame didn't feel like freedom. The attention was overwhelming. Every time she looked in the mirror, she remembered the fear she'd felt standing in front of Holtz, the humiliation, the doubt. One evening, she found herself sitting on a park bench as the sun went down, watching kids play in the distance. That's when Michael appeared, dressed in plain clothes this time, no suit, no badge. "I thought you'd be halfway to another mission by now," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "I was, but I wanted to see how you were holding up." She looked at him, then down at her hands. "Better, I guess. People keep calling me brave, but I didn't feel brave. I felt small." Michael sat beside her. "You stood up in front of power. That's never small. You did something most people wouldn't dare." She smiled a little. "So what happens to Holtz now?" Michael's face darkened. "He's cooperating, but the names he's giving us, it's deeper than anyone thought. Politicians, CEOs, even law enforcement. The rot runs wide." "Will you take them all down?" she asked. He chuckled quietly. "One by one, maybe. But you don't kill corruption in a day. You just keep shining light until there's nowhere left for it to hide." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the sky fade to gold and pink. Then Emily turned to him. "You know, you could have walked away. You could have stayed undercover and let me lose." Michael shook his head. "Justice isn't justice if you have to hide to deliver it." He looked at her for a long moment, then added softly, "And besides, I don't like bullies." For the first time in weeks, Emily laughed. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a quiet, genuine laugh that carried the weight of everything she'd been through. As the days passed, Holtz's fall sparked investigations across the judicial system. Dozens of past cases were reopened. Victims who'd been silenced found the courage to speak again. Emily was invited to testify before Congress about workplace retaliation and corruption in the courts. She didn't want the spotlight, but Michael told her it mattered. So she did it. Standing before lawmakers, her voice steady but filled with emotion, she said, "Justice should never depend on who has more money or power. It should belong to the truth." Her words echoed across the country. Months later, when Holtz was finally sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, Emily didn't attend the hearing. She didn't need to see him again. She'd already reclaimed her voice, her dignity, and her peace. But Michael was there, standing quietly at the back of the courtroom, watching the man who had once ruled with arrogance now stand in chains. When the sentence was read, Holtz turned around, eyes burning with hatred. "You think this changes anything?" he snarled. "You think the system's clean because of you?" Michael didn't answer. He just walked out, leaving the sound of the gavel behind him. Outside, the city was bathed in late afternoon light. He pulled out his phone, a message from Director Harris. "New assignment. High-level corruption in capital contracts. Report to HQ." He stared at it for a moment, then slid the phone back into his pocket. He wasn't sure how many more battles he had in him, but he knew one thing: the fight never really ended. A few weeks later, he stopped by Emily's new office, a small non-profit she'd started to help women facing workplace abuse. She looked stronger now, confident, alive. "Back to saving the world?" she asked with a smile. He grinned, trying one courtroom at a time. "Be careful," she said softly. "People like you make powerful enemies." He met her eyes, that same calm, steady look she remembered from the first day. "Good," he said. "That means I'm still on the right side." As he left, Emily watched him disappear into the crowd, another ghost in a suit, carrying secrets and truth in equal measure. She turned back to her desk, a framed quote sitting by her computer screen, one she'd chosen after it was all over. "Justice isn't blind. It's just waiting for someone brave enough to open its eyes." And somewhere in another city, another courtroom, another corrupt hand would tremble, because a woman once humiliated in court had found her voice, and the man who helped her had sworn to keep fighting in the shadows. Because no matter how deep the lies ran, truth always had a way of finding the light.